This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and my job here is to help you grow your leadership skills, grow your business, and grow your income. We've got a great interview with a gentleman named Dave Umstot today. It's going to be some great stuff. We're going to talk about lean construction, a little bit more on that in a minute. But two things I want to talk to you about before we get into the interview with Dave. First of all is a question. What is one of the largest productivity killers in the construction industry that is reducible, yet is something that hardly anybody is doing anything about? I'm not talking about the skilled labor shortage. I'm not talking about architects and owners. And no, I'm not talking about millennials texting on their mobile phone on the job. I'm talking about unresolved conflict. It's either between two people that work together in the office, two people that work together side by side on the job site, could be a manager and a direct report, could be the general contractor and subcontractor, etc. Let me tell you a story. Early on in my career, this was 15 or so years ago, I worked with an old project manager. His name was Daryl. And Daryl didn't exactly have the best conflict resolution skills. He had his own way of handling conflict, you might say. See, he bragged at one point, probably to everybody, about firing every carpenter in the union hall on one of the projects that he managed. In fact, I worked with him on a project. We were renovating the lobbies of a high-rise office building. And for some reason, Daryl got sideways with the drywall superintendent on the job. I mean, it just built and built and built. And it even got to the point where Daryl said, "I hate those guys, and I'm going to screw them every chance I get." Now, he used a little bit more colorful language than I did, but he said, "I hate those guys, and I'm going to stick it to them every chance I got." Now, obviously, this was not good for the project, wasn't good for the drywall sub, and it really wasn't even good for Daryl. It was a huge distraction. We spent a lot of time bitching and moaning about the drywall guy and trying to catch him making a mistake, trying to stick it to the drywall guy. So Daryl, you could say, made several mistakes when it came to dealing with conflict on his project. Now, I've seen a lot of mistakes when it comes to handling conflict in business and on job sites. And in fact, a lot of those mistakes were made by me. I've made a lot of mistakes in my career when it comes to dealing with conflict. Now, there's a lot of research that says that unresolved conflict is a huge problem in business today, and for that matter, it's even a huge problem in marriages and families too. Think about it. Think about the old grudges and old unresolved issues in your family or people that you've worked with in the past, or maybe it's between you and your spouse. Those things need to be resolved. And unresolved conflict is a huge problem. So what I've done is I've put together a list of 41 mistakes to avoid when it comes to dealing with conflict. Again, I dug everywhere I could through my own experience, did a lot of research, and came up with a list of 41 mistakes to avoid. Frankly, I thought I might have 12 to 15, but the more research I did, the more I found. So 41 mistakes to avoid when it comes to dealing with conflict. Here are a couple of examples for you from the list. Number one is having a combat mentality. If you go into a conflict thinking there has to be a winner or a loser, then you're approaching it all wrong. That's the combat mentality. Number 8 on the list is dealing with conflict publicly. Confronting someone in front of a group, in my opinion, is a coward's way out. It's fine to have one or two other people in the room with you when you deal with a conflict, but you need to do it in private. Don't do it in front of everybody on the job site or everybody in the office. Number 14 on the list this is one of my pet peeves, speculating about motives. The reality is you can judge facts, but you can only speculate or guess why someone did something, unless you're a mind reader. You are assuming you know, and a lot of times we ascribe motives to people for the actions that we see, but the reality is you can only speculate about their motives. That's a big problem. And number 20, the last one I'll share with you from the list, is filling the silence. There's a lot of people who are so uncomfortable with silence that when they have this tough conversation with someone, they just can't shut up. They just can't handle the silence. So what you got to realize is, while you may have been preparing for this tough conversation for a few days or weeks, and you've worked this through in your head quite a bit, you got to remember that this could be a surprise for the other person. This is the first time they're hearing your thoughts. So you need to let them process and then resist the urge to fill that uncomfortable silence. So I strongly recommend you go get this list of 41 mistakes to avoid when dealing with conflict, and then you need to figure out which ones you're guilty of. I mean, a lot of these they're from my list. These are things I've done, and I'm working on them. So if you want to get this list of 41 mistakes to avoid when dealing with conflict, go to constructionleadingedge.com/mistakes, enter your email address, and I'll send it out to you. Next thing I want to talk about for just a couple minutes before we get into the interview with Dave Umstot. On the last episode 39, I interviewed Tony Booth, and he talked about customer service and how to get repeat business. Now, one big mistake contractors make in the area when it comes to customer service is in the area of communication. We get our heads down, we're all about scope, schedule, budget, deliver the project, and we forget to communicate with our clients. Now, I've been on the other side. I spent several years as an owner's rep managing contractors, and what you may not realize as a contractor is that your clients are developing a story about your project in their head based on whatever information they have available. So if you aren't feeding them information about the project, then they're building this story by piecing it together based on emails, phone calls, and maybe just wild speculation. So the best way to prevent speculation and the best way to have clients who feel plugged in, who feel like they're connected and feel like they know what's going on with the projects, the best way to do that is for you to give them information on a regular basis. Not too much information, but give them the right level of information at the right frequency. An email is nice just to let them know what's going on. Maybe a phone call to explain would be even better. But what I found is that a nice report with pictures is the best way to communicate this is what's going on with your project. Now, a great way to prepare these reports is this cool app that I found recently called ArcSnapper. I use this every week. I walk around, I take pictures with my phone. I could also use my iPad as well. I can add comments. I can even annotate pictures and sketch on pictures if I want to. And boom, I can have good-looking PDF reports ready to email out without touching Microsoft Word, without opening Google Docs, and without using a cable. I don't have to plug my phone in. I don't have to plug in a digital camera. It just all happens beautifully. So if you want to check it out, it's called ArcSnapper. Go to constructionleadingedge.com/reports, and there's some more information there. I even put together a brief demo video to show you how the app works. It's good stuff. Now, let's talk about the interview with Dave Umstot. Dave is the president of Umstot Project and Facility Solutions. He's a California registered civil engineer. He's been in the business for almost 30 years. He has delivered more than $2 billion in construction of higher education, K through 12, healthcare, and a variety of other facilities. He's an expert in project delivery methods and specifically construction or lean construction methodologies. He even teaches graduate level courses in construction engineering and management at San Diego State University. This is going to be a good interview, and you need to stick with it until the end. We get into some great stuff at the end of this interview, and we cover topics including lean construction techniques that will help your foreman nearly double their success rate at meeting schedule and production commitments. That's a big deal. We talk about how lean can help you speed up your projects and, more importantly, make more money. We talk about the fundamental mindset shifts that you need to make to be more successful and that lean construction is based on. We talk about a better way to plan your projects and how you can never issue meeting minutes again. There is a way to get away from coordination meeting minutes. We talk about what is the last planner system. If you've heard that, we get into some details on the last planner system, how to get into lean, how to get started with lean, even if you have no idea where to start. And then we even get into the psychology of motivation that lean construction taps into. So without further ado, here's the interview with David Umstot. Enjoy. All right, Dave, thanks for being on the podcast. How are you today?
Doing great, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. This is going to be a good conversation. So do us a favor and just give us a brief rundown on your career, kind of how you got to where you're at today.
Okay, well, let's see if we can do that in 2 minutes or less. Started out after graduate school as a design engineer, and then they got dragged into construction. And lo and behold, now I had to figure out how to actually implement my designs, and that was a particularly eye-opening experience. Then worked with the Bechtel organization and got into project management, program management, and ultimately ended up running construction operations for them on a program in Greece, Italy, and Turkey. Spent a stint with Hennessy Group running their operations on the design build construction subsidiary, heavy into healthcare renovation projects, central plants, data centers, and then had an opportunity to be a public owner for 10 years. It's kind of an atypical or untraditional career path, but it made sense for me in my personal situation at the time. And anytime you have an opportunity to put a couple $1 billion in the ground in your backyard and really leave a legacy, that's a pretty tempting thing to do. So I had the opportunity to run 2 large capital bond programs and lead fantastic teams. We learned a lot on the first one, and from the second one, we ended up really taking on a whole new perspective on how can we deliver capital projects, and we'll talk more about that today. And 2.5 years ago, actually it was actually 3.5 years ago, I was on a safari in Africa with my wife and wondering, well, what next to do with the career? You've worked internationally, you've done a lot of things domestically, in a national role, in a regional role. What do you want to do next? And the conclusion is how can we share the information that we've learned through all of these lessons and the journey that we've had in capital project delivery with others so that we can really help deliver better projects, performance, and results. And we'll talk more about that as we get deeper into the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've had the rare opportunity to put into place an amount of work in the billions of dollars, which a lot of people don't have that opportunity to do. So yeah, I'm looking forward to tapping into your knowledge. So as part of your career, you got involved with Lean. Can you tell us how and or why you got involved in Lean? Was there something that sort of precipitated your involvement with Lean, or was it a natural progression?
No, well, it's a great question, and a lot of times people ask, well, what is Lean? And I guess we'll get to that here in a minute. But what drove us, or drove me in a leadership capacity with my team, was having delivered $500 million worth of construction over a 3-year period through predominantly design, bid, build. It was a painful experience as an owner. Lots of change orders, lots of political pressure from our governing board for change orders, lots of claims, lots of weekends spent in dispute resolution and mediation with opposing parties, litigation, and frankly, it just wasn't a whole lot of fun. And so in 2007, I was offered the opportunity to kick off a $1.6 billion capital bond program for the San Diego Community College District. And the beauty about that, and what was really attractive, is here was a program very early on in its execution. There were somewhere between 80 and 100 projects that were being planned on the books. And so, wow, with a blank slate, what would you do? And so we actually sat down collectively as a team and said, what can we do to make things better? Meaning, how do we stop doing things that we don't like to do? One of my friends, Dick Beyer, another thought leader in the Lean community, always says, well, what do you loathe and what do you like? How do we end up eliminating the stuff that we loathe and do more of the stuff that we like? And so kind of using that as a baseline or a premise of our discussion, we looked very hard at what was going on out in the industry, and we were inspired by what Sutter Healthcare was doing at the time. Remember, this is 2007, And they were just starting to get going in a very robust manner with their integrated form of agreement in integrated project delivery. We looked at that and said, wow, what a concept. How can we as a public agency try and emulate that within the constraints that we have working on us as a public agency? It happens to be at that particular point in time, we also had a design build statute which went into effect January 1st, 2008. And voila, the connection was, okay, let's use design build to get as close as we can to what Sutter Health is doing, trying to enhance the collaborative process, trying to reduce a lot of those pain points and move forward with a more successful program and deliver more value to our students and our faculty and our staff, as well as greater value to the taxpayer. And that really kind of came and have fun in the process, not to lose sight of that. And that's kind of how we embarked on our lean journey at San Diego Community College District. There's a corollary that follows on the maintenance and operations side, which is probably noteworthy as well. And that my responsibilities were not only for delivering this $1.6 billion capital program, but I also had facilities, maintenance, operations, and groundskeeping, and college police and parking as part of my responsibility. And here was the challenge that we had in 2008. So we made the decision in 2007 to how can we make this a better process. Well, in 2008, what happened? The Great Recession. And we found ourselves in a situation where locally approved voter funds for the capital improvements were going to basically add 1.6 million square feet to our building portfolio, which was about an 80% increase over what we currently had. And at the same time, our operating budgets were cut $46 million from the state of California. We were basically a state-funded institution. And that equated to a 16% loss in revenue. So do the quick math, got 80% more stuff to maintain and operate, and light and heat and cool, and 16% less money. Wow, business as usual would not work. Yeah. So in 2008, we said, well, we were going to have to change the way that we deliver our service to our customers if we have any chance at all in maintaining an appropriate level of appearance, as well as facilities that actually met their design intent and were meeting the needs of those in the building, whether it be proper lighting, proper thermal comfort, those types of things. And so we actually embarked on a lean journey in our maintenance and operations side, which is a whole nother story, but kind of cutting to the bottom line on that. We reduced our operating cost for maintenance, I should say our maintenance cost per square foot from $3.83 down to $1.54 over a 4-year period. Wow. Yeah, so a pretty substantial improvement, and there are all kinds of stories that go behind that, but it was a combination of stop doing things that we shouldn't be doing, standardize things that we were doing well, start doing things that we needed to do, and really focus on our mission and how could we continuously improve and do that better. And in concert with our design and construction program, really making smart choices with respect to total cost of ownership. And that too often we're making decisions based on first cost. And the first costs are only typically 10 to 20% of the total life cycle cost of an asset over its life expectancy. So
that's an interesting statistic.
It's an interesting statistic, but a lot of us in the construction industry don't necessarily have any focus on that. So we were trying to make better decisions with the investment of our money on the front end so that we could have lower maintenance cost on the back end, or custodial costs as the case may be. Highly energy efficient buildings, invest more in the envelope and in the system so that we had to spend less on utilities. Being in a situation where maybe we selected, if we could afford it, some type of more permanent floor, whether it be terrazzo or maybe stained stamped concrete as opposed to more traditional floorings, because those will last the life of the building. And so we started making decisions really on the basis of the total cost of ownership rather than the initial first cost. And there were a lot of tools that went behind that. But all those things really helped contribute to that significant performance I just quoted, going from $3.83 down to $1.54 a square foot.
Gotcha. Well, let me jump in, and for those people who aren't all that familiar with lean construction, if you had to give your elevator pitch on what is lean construction, how would you do that?
Well, it's a great question, and quite simply, lean is really about trying to continuously improve. And how do you do more of what we should be doing and less of what we shouldn't be doing? And so a lot of that comes down to learning to see and really look hard at, why are we doing things the way we are? And so the Lean Construction Institute, which is a voice for lean project delivery and lean construction in the United States, basically says that lean project delivery is about creating value through eliminating waste and using the human potential that we have within our teams to really deliver that value and continuously improve. So that's kind of a very focused Paul Akers. If you haven't heard of Paul is not in the construction industry, but he's a very well-known lean thinker here in the United States. And he wrote a book called 2-Second Lean. And to your question about definition of lean, well, he says, I want you to make a 30-second improvement every day in work or at home. I don't care where, but one of the two. And people, so that was all his employees throughout his organization. So what he's trying to do is change the culture of his company so that they're always continuously looking at ways to improve the way that they do their business. And those small incremental changes collectively can have huge dividends. And so people would ask Paul, well, what should I fix? Paul, what should I focus on? And he says, fix what bugs you. So think about that. We go to work every day and we deal with all kinds of issues. And a lot of times we're firefighting, we're dealing with the crisis of the day. We deal with the crisis and we move on, and we don't take a lot of time to sit there and really do some analysis on, well, what really caused that problem? And how can we avoid having that problem resurface and again on a project? And so lean is about trying to address those types of things. So how do you get rid of some of those headaches, permanently, or get to a point where they're not creating these repeat issues on projects?
That's good. I'll definitely have to check out that book. That's Paul Akers, 2-Second Lean.
2-Second Lean. Akers is spelled Akers.
Got it. I'll definitely check that out. So for the contractors who are listening to this podcast thinking, I've heard it called, a lot of people listen to the radio station WII-FM, What's in it for me? So what's in it for them? What's in it for contractors? Why should they adopt lean or even care about lean?
Wow. Okay. Well, having lived on the delivery side of this prior to being an owner for a long period of time, wouldn't it be nice if you could reliably and predictably know when you were going to finish the job and when your trades were going to be on the job, and do that in a manner which enhanced your profitability, reduced your rework, and people actually at the end of the job liked each other and wanted to work together again? I mean, that's kind of the end game if lean is done in a proper manner. It's really about making that environment much more collaborative and because of that, those outcomes I just described occur. And we could talk a little bit more. I think we're going to talk about last planner system here later about scheduling and what are the benefits of that. But from my experience on lean projects, they tend to be high-performing teams. And particularly the specialty trades, when the specialty trades go onto a lean project, they don't want to go to a more traditional project afterwards. And in fact, we've actually heard specialty trade contractors, electrical contractors, mechanical contractors say, hey, if we're going to do this type of project again in the future, we'll give you a 5% reduction in our cost. And you go, wow, okay, 5% reduction in cost. Well, why do you think that is? Well, it's because jobs that are managed with lean principles, the trades can reliably and predictably have the right size crew to the job site at the right time and actually accomplish what they plan on doing. So that's what's in it for contractors, whether you're a specialty trade or whether you're a builder that's managing or integrating all those, finishing jobs on time. All the lawsuits I was ever involved with as a public owner, with the exception of one, which was professional design errors and omissions, was tied to projects being late. And what happens when projects are late? One of two things happens. Typically, people have additional costs that they've incurred beyond what they planned for in the project. So they try and recoup those costs through one of two things, either a claim tied to general conditions and other types of field overhead, extended overhead conditions, or an inefficiency claim, meaning that we planned on working a certain way, didn't happen, and we were impacted, and so we want the difference in the cost between those two. Well, neither one of those is a real winner for the owner, and frankly, it's not a real winner for the contractor either. Typically, those things end up costing attorney's fees, lots of frustration. And guess what? The time that everyone's spending arguing about that is now not being spent productively making money somewhere else. So all those things can be avoided through a lean project.
All very good reasons. So are there some fundamental shifts, either paradigm shifts or behavioral shifts, that people need to be able to embrace if they're going to operate in a lean environment? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, that's a great question, Todd. So, the answer is yes, there are some fundamental shifts that are required, at least in one's thinking. And that, particularly on the builder side, superintendents and builders have adopted a command and control structure, which goes back to Taylor, and if we go back to the Industrial Revolution and efficiency and productivity, this is all based on Taylor. But all of it is based on a command and control. And what's happening is buildings are becoming more complex, and no one has all the knowledge in order to coordinate everything on the job. And that is a significant change away. We need to move away from a command and control structure to one more like a coach. So think about it in this analogy. You're I was going to say the San Diego Chargers, but we're playing pretty poorly this year. Say you're the Carolina Panthers. All right, so they haven't lost a game yet this year. I probably just jinxed them. But the players, if the coach basically can come up with a game plan, but the players actually have to execute it. And the players are the ones that are actually going to win the game. And we need to develop that same type of attitude with respect to our projects. And that rather than being, the general barking orders, we should really be the coach that develops plans in collaboration with the team and really gives them the resources they need. And ask the question, what can I do for you, or what information do you need from me in order to get your job done? And that doesn't happen as much as it should in the way we traditionally approach projects. So moving away from command and control more to an enabling coaching type of approach is big. Another thing, and you won't hear me use today the term general contractor and subcontractor, other than this comment right here. And the reason is, subcontractor, by its very definition, think about what sub means below. And so from a hierarchy perspective, you've already put somebody on an uneven playing field. They're not a partner. They are somebody below where you are in the hierarchy. And so we need to move away from that, in my mind, and in the integrated form of delivery or integrated form of agreement. Actually, a lot of the specialty trades may be signatory to a contract with the builder and with the architect, and the owner. So we're starting to see a lot more of that in some of the industries which tend to be a little more complex, things like hospitals, things like semiconductor manufacturing facilities, things like pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities. These Disney, where they got a lot of one-off, really unusual types of projects. So the more complex it gets, the better these types of examples work.
So those are some fundamental paradigm shifts, and those are pretty big to go from, I'm sure, well, I've worked with some old school superintendents, and I'm pretty sure I never heard them ask the question, what can I do to help you? That was not necessarily in their vocabulary. So there's some paradigm shifts. What does it look like? What are some more tactical type changes, whether it be in let's say project meetings? What does a lean project meeting look like? Or maybe highlight the differences in what a lean project coordination meeting or a planning meeting looks like versus the typical approach.
Okay, well, that's a great segue into some discussion about the last planner system. And let me back up and frame that in the context. The Lynn Ballard and Greg Howell are co-founders of the Lean Construction Institute, but they were doing productivity studies back in the 80s and 90s. And during the 90s, they were doing some work on productivity in Louisiana and East Texas in the oil patch and in the petrochemical complexes. And what they were looking at was ways to try and improve productivity of the workers. And what they discovered is they met with a wide variety, 7 different companies, a large number of superintendents in the number of hundreds. Average years of experience was about 20, so pretty seasoned. And what they found is that 54% of what the superintendents and foremen planned to do on a weekly basis actually got done. So 54%. And it ranged from 27 to 70 depending upon the particular project, but the average is 54%. So they came to the conclusion of, wow, well, what's driving that? If we're only accomplishing a little more than half of what we planned, it's no wonder we have schedule challenges. And they developed what's called the last planner system. And the last planner system is maybe the last planners are the last people that are planning the work. So those that are actually going to be planning their crew's work for the day. So this is typically your superintendents and foremen. First planners are normally the owners. Second planners may be designers or builders in a pre-construction service. But the last planners are those that are actually going to be planning the daily work. And with the system that they've developed, we start to see people perform in 80 to 90% of what they plan to do on any given week. And so if you go from 54 to 80 to 90%, good things happen. So that's one of the tactics that one can use for implementing lean on a project. And so what does the last planner look like? Well, let's talk a little bit about a traditional schedule on a project. Most projects have a critical path method schedule. And critical path method scheduling has been around, I guess it was invented back in the 50s and was adopted back in the mid-60s as kind of the standard for the construction industry. But what happens in the critical path method scheduling is that there is a scheduler, whoever he or she may be, and they are using their best knowledge to develop a sequence of activities with durations and logic and estimated crew sizes to determine how long it would take to do a project and in what sequence. And typically they may have 30 years experience. We've run into projects where they actually have young project engineers, fresh out of school, less than 5 years experience, doing project schedules, and that can present challenges. So with the last planner, you end up going to the job site. You have all the trade foremen present during the scheduling exercise, superintendent, and for the builder, and everybody works collectively to develop the schedule. And that may seem rather chaotic, and it may say, well, wow, how are you ever going to get 20 or 30 people to work together? It's phenomenal to watch. But what happens is you have those 20 foremen and superintendents there. Now you start looking at, say, even if each of them has 20 years experience, you have 20 foremen, 20 years experience, you now have 400 years of experience that's informing that schedule, as opposed to 30 or 5 or whatever the number is. And they all know how the various handoffs go between the trades. And so what happens is that you have a meeting where we're actually using color Post-its. You put the Post-its on the wall, and there's actually 5 elements to the last planner system. One is what's called a milestone plan. So when does the project need to be finished? What are some of the interim milestones that need to happen? Things like get out of the ground, maybe topping out, maybe weathering in, maybe permanent power to the site. Those are pretty typical for vertical construction. You have similar type of milestones for the horizontal side. And then each of the trades works on what are their independent milestones they need to achieve to actually complete that work and meet those milestones. And once that is agreed upon, then there's actually what's called a phase pull. And the difference between CPM scheduling, which is essentially a push, because you go through the schedule development and each activity kind of pushes the next one to the right and so on, and ultimately you get to the completion of the project. In pull scheduling, you look at that milestone and work backwards. So if you're going to meet the date of, say, June 1st, look at June 1st and what has to happen just before completing on June 1st, and what has to happen just before that, and what has to happen just before that, and so on and so forth. And you work your way all the way back to today with the activities. And what that does is you're actually pulling the production to the date as opposed to just sequencing the work and it finishes when it finishes. That becomes also very powerful. Then there is a weekly meeting to update status. Typically, we see these run about an hour. It's no different. Well, it's a lot different from a traditional meeting where the superintendent typically runs it, hands out the 2-week look ahead, and asks for comment or tells people in a lot of cases, Mr. Electrician, I need you to have a crew of 6 or 8 or whatever their number is here on site on Monday. And without asking the question, framer, are you going to have your rough framing installed to a point where the electricians can follow behind with roughing? And how many times, if you were to talk to an electrical contractor, how many times have they shown up on a job site because the superintendent told them to be there with a crew, and then the work wasn't ready for them? And so now they're either doing workarounds or sending people to other jobs, sending people home, really being inefficient about their approach. So the weekly work plans really allow everybody in the room, since we now have this visual schedule that's on the board, everyone can see what it is. There's a daily huddle once a day, typically lasts 10 to 15 minutes. What are we planning to do today? Did we get done what we planned to do yesterday? If we didn't, why not? And what is it going to impact on the project? And when we say why not, it's not, why didn't you get it done? It's like, well, what happened? Let's understand why. And in Lean, there's what they call the 5 whys. And that typically you ask why the first time, it's an excuse. If you ask why the second time, it's typically a better excuse. Time to ask the third why, now you're starting to get to the symptoms. And by the time you've drilled down to the 4th or 5th why, you really have kind of the root cause of what the issue is. And that's one of the beauties of the last planner system, is that it allows the team to address and swarm these kinds of issues so that they don't continue to be impacting the project week after week after week. And I can't tell you how many projects I've seen where that's the case. And there are a lot of owners that want to have a monthly CPM schedule update. Well, by the time that data is collected and gets to them, it's typically 6 weeks out of date. How do you act on something that's 6 weeks in the past. Well, you can't. And so the last planner system is really designed to allow the teams, those that are actually doing the work, to make adjustments on a daily basis or at most a weekly basis, and really try and make the schedule work in a better fashion. So kind of in a summary there, as a long-winded explanation, but highly visual, highly collaborative. And what happens is that at the wall where the foremen are actually communicating, great conversations occur. And that, coming back to the electrician and the framer, electrician will say, hey, I can get in here and do this if you can release this part of the floor plate to me on Tuesday, or whatever the magic number is. But what that does is we see that really compressed schedules. I'll give you an example on a hospital project here in California. It was actually the Stockton Correctional Hospital, and so this was actually under federal receivership. Really interesting project, but essentially it was a correctional facility with healthcare embedded into it to treat basically prisoners that have various types of health ailments. The joint venture team there of McCarthy and Clark basically had a very compressed schedule, and they were spending $1.5 million a day is what they were putting in the ground, and they needed to get to $3 million a day in order to meet the schedule. They adopted last planner kind of midway through and basically got to the $3 million a day work in place, and actually ended up finishing the project a little earlier than the very aggressive schedule called for. So very powerful tool that, coming back to the tactics, is really at the heart of some of the tools that you would use on a lean project.
So a couple of things I want to highlight, and one question I want to talk to you about regarding the psychology that the system implements. So what I'm hearing you say is one of the fundamental shifts regarding the schedule is you're going from the scheduling guru who sits on the mountain and passes out the CPM schedule to the group, shifting to you develop a milestone schedule, and then the entire team really plans the schedule. So the people who are going to be implementing it, the last planners, are going to be doing the work. It also seems like a lot of the planning is being handed off to the people closest to the actual work being put in place, as opposed to getting sort of, to use a military analogy, orders coming from HQ getting passed through. You're equipping the people closest to the work with the information that they need and the autonomy to do the work. And it seems to me, based on my experience, and you tell me what you think about this statement, it seems to me that one of the most powerful things is the psychology of the last planner system, where the people who are going to be doing the work have ownership in the plan because they're part of the development of the plan, versus the old approach, like you mentioned. Superintendent hands out the 2-week look ahead and says, you need to have 6 guys, you need to be doing this, micromanaging it. My experience has been when you try to shove something down somebody's throat, the immediate response is they look for obstacles, they look for reasons it won't work. Whereas if they're part of the development of the plan, then they have ownership and they'll overcome those obstacles. What do you think about that statement?
I think you're absolutely spot on, and that I didn't articulate this, but that's a great summary there, Todd. But as part of the visual development of the schedule, every trade or design discipline, if the design team is actually participating, and they should, has their own color-coded post-it with certain information that goes on it. And they have to place their own tags on the wall, and that is a commitment. And so the schedule becomes a network of commitments that these foremen have made to one another. And to your point, yes, they own it. And not only do they own it, the peer pressure from those that are there, foremen don't want to disappoint another foreman if they can avoid it. And so the psychology behind that is powerful. And You don't expect somebody to hit 100% every time. If you do, or if we see that, typically it means that somebody is sandbagging what they think it takes to get the job done to hit 100%, as opposed to making it reliable and predictable. But you're absolutely right. The psychology that comes with that is phenomenal. And what that does is it builds trust and it builds collaboration on the projects. And that is where the real power in this scheduling system is.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about some of the maybe not so apparent cascade effects or the domino effects of lean on projects. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that I really like about the lean process is that at the end of a planning meeting, you have a visual, you have an entire wall with the plan, as opposed to maybe somebody's notes that they are going to issue as a set of meeting minutes. Perhaps maybe they'll send them out that day. My experience, a lot of meeting minutes come out the morning of the next meeting a week later, which is completely useless. So you end up with this visual that's close to real time, and at any point somebody can go in and look at what their commitments are, which I really like that, since we're all very visual, and it's right there for somebody to look at. So have you seen any not so apparent or maybe hidden benefits of lean when it comes to maybe it's job site organization, logistics, cooperation, anything like that maybe not so apparent, but it's a bonus to a lean project?
Well, I think what ends up happening is, let's think about a project where you have to use just in time. Say you're working in a downtown footprint somewhere, or maybe an existing hospital, but say a downtown footprint where you have no laydown area. And so you can't bring and stage a bunch of material on site. So when the material comes on site, it has to be carefully choreographed and coordinated. And the last planner system really allows that type of thing with a high degree of predictability and reliability to occur. So we found that to be very powerful along that lines. We see high-performing teams that literally don't take meeting minutes. In the lean world, most people don't read meeting minutes, number one. But what happens that comes out of the schedule is a constraint log that identifies what are the issues which are impacting the project. It's, once again, visual, and allows people to understand, what are the things that are preventing me from doing my work or releasing the work that is upcoming in the next 6 weeks. So that's a pretty powerful thing. Some of the other things that we see on lean jobs is a principle called 5S. And it comes from the Toyota production system. And people, you notice I haven't talked too much about Toyota. A lot of people, lean comes from the Toyota production system. But I don't want people, particularly in the construction industry, to get the idea that, gee, this is just something for car manufacturing. Oh, man, there are so many great things that we can learn from that and apply to make ourselves better, that I think that's a really profound thing. But 5S is basically sort, set to order, shine, standardize, and sustain. So you sit there and you wonder, well, what does all that mean? Well, that means, think about this. If you go to a job site and it's clean and everything is well organized, everything is in its place, all of the temporary power cords are overhead, all of the material and all of the boxes and tools on the job site are on rollers, and there's no detritus or garbage or litter on the floor, that job, I almost guarantee you, is going to be on schedule, is going to be safer, and is going to have a higher degree of quality. I go to a job site and I see all kinds of stuff all over the floor where, the trades have been coming through and just dropping and moving on. You've got drywall stacked here. You've got, stacks of conduit and duct work and everything else all over the job site. Pretty much guaranteed that job's not being built in as efficient a manner as it could. It probably is a less safe job. And I think if you look at the safety statistics and the quality and the built-in inspection side of it, you would find that those jobs traditionally are less safe and have more rework tied to quality issues. So that's another nugget, if you will, from the lean community that we could really do a better job of on our construction sites.
So do you find that better organization and better cooperation, well, let's talk about cleanliness and organization. Do you find that organization and job cleanliness just improves on its own on a lean project?
I think there have to be some certain expectations set. And the communication that happens in the last planner meetings helps tremendously on that, and then the foreman can take that back to their crews. But here are some examples of things that work very effectively, and they're pretty simple. One, don't let anything hit the floor. Okay? So if you work in a chop saw, put a 5-gallon Homer bucket underneath where the chop excess is coming off. Drops right into the bucket. Now you don't have to pick it up off the floor. So that's one thing. If you've got something coming to the job site, put it on rollers. So if you've got doors coming, for instance, well, put them on rollers, roll them right where they need to be, hang the door. Drywall. Let's think about drywall. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen drywall show up on a site and it gets moved. It's lucky if it's only moved twice before it's hung. It's more typical moved 3 times, 4 times, maybe more. And what happens when we move the drywall? Well, it gets damaged. It may damage something else. What happens, so now we're wasting craft labor's time moving material rather than hanging it and following on with taping and mudding. If we damage anything, now we have to get rid of the damaged material, which means people are now not available to work on tools. They're busy hauling stuff off to send to the recycler, to the dump. And those are some of the things that kind of come out of there. And it's very simple. Keep it on wheels and handle it only once if you can. Derives all kinds of good things on the job site. Having power overhead, I mentioned that earlier. I can't tell you how many power cords I've seen damaged from people driving over the power cords with the man lift, or how many people have tripped and other types of things and ended up with injury. So those are very simple things that can be done, and that just has to be, the tone has to be set at the beginning of the job, and it has to be a continuous thing. And I see so many job sites where the trades just kind of drop what they do. They may do a daily composite clean, or hey, it's Friday afternoon, it's time for the weekly cleanup. Send me a guy from every crew that's here, and we'll do this together. Well, that's not an effective way to sustain all the benefits that come from having a clean, organized job site.
Yeah, and one thing that I've found that works well, going back to the different way of motivating people, would be at the beginning of a job site to just have a plan. And what I would do would be to throw out some problems and say, all right, we need to keep the job site clean. How are we going to do that? We need to avoid damaging everybody's electrical cords. How are we going to do that? And instead of prescribing methods, ask the question, maybe even having some solutions in my mind, but just ask the question and then get the other person to come up with the idea, because we as humans, we are much more likely to follow through with our idea than with somebody else's. I was just listening to a podcast with a guy named Daniel Pink, who wrote a book called Drive, and also To Sell is Human. And he talked about how in the selling process, it's much better for someone to come up with an idea themselves by asking questions as opposed to prescribing somebody. And he also said, we don't motivate other people. Nobody can motivate me. I can't motivate somebody else, but we can create the right conditions for people to motivate themselves. And some of the most successful projects I've seen is when the people in leadership aren't prescribing the things that need to be done, but saying, how are we going to do this? And then staying out in front of the team. It's very similar to pull planning. Instead of it's like pull leadership instead of push leadership, and I found that to be very successful. So let me ask you a question. What are some of the common mistakes that you see people make that are trying to the folks who are trying to implement lean? Maybe they're wherever they're at on the spectrum of lean adoption. Are there some common mistakes that you could share with the folks here that maybe they're interested in adopting it and this will save them some time going up the learning curve?
Well, I guess there's several things that our team has observed that are potential pitfalls, or at least warning signs. One is a lot of organizations are interested in getting better, or they look at lean as maybe a silver bullet, as opposed to, no, we're fundamentally going to change the way that we approach the way we do our work. Lean's really about kind of changing your philosophy and your culture so that you're continuously improving. And to your point with Dan Pink and others on how do you end up leveraging the creativity of your workforce? I mean, they're the ones that are at the face of the work. They're the ones that have the best ideas for improvement. How do you empower them to go do that day after day? And so what we see a lot of times is people thinking that lean is a silver bullet. Okay, check the box, done, and that doesn't achieve what they want to achieve. Two, we found that a lot of organizations, the top leadership, if they're trying to do this as an organization, the top leadership has to walk the talk. I mean, they have to be the champion of this, and they can't delegate it. I mean, and we've seen that in a number of organizations. Well, I'm the CEO, I'm too busy for that. I've got operations people that can take care of that. Well, that is not going to sustain if it doesn't have the focus of the leadership, just like safety or just like quality. It's one of those things that if it's driven from the top and championed from the top, then good things can happen. Some of the other things that I think we have that are kind of challenging for us as a construction culture is that we have historically promoted people that are very good at firefighting. And what I mean by firefighting is solving whatever the problem of the day is. And in a lot of cases, they may be self-generated problems. But there are a lot of people that are actually very good at it, and they end up getting promoted. And I think we need to kind of step back from that a minute and say, well, let's look at that, and that if we are failing to plan our work properly, then we are essentially planning to fail. And so we need to change that mindset away from firefighting to making the time to address what are the causes of problems that we're having so that we don't end up having to continually firefight and solve that issue, or what I would call Band-Aid that issue, as opposed to addressing the root cause of it. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Sorry to interrupt you. I wanted to jump in on that because I agree completely, and that's an intrinsic problem in construction. We look at the guys or gals who are good firefighters and think, man, they're the straw that stirs the drink. They're out there solving problems, and they're really busy, and they're active, and maybe they're working 60 hours a week and constant motion. But yeah, in a lot of cases, it's just a symptom of poor planning. And then beyond that, I've worked with people who have what I call the no problem. So they only operate in firefighter mode, and if things are going well, they don't know how to handle it. So they either subconsciously let problems occur, or they go cause problems because they don't know how to operate. They're only comfortable in crisis mode. And I can tell you, if you have people with the no problem in your organization, you should probably get them out, because they may look busy and they may seem effective, but the reality is they can only operate effectively in crisis mode.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'll quote Glenn Ballard here, who's one of the brains behind the last planner system, and that, to your point, he says, change your people or change your people, meaning that you change your people's behavior, and if you're unsuccessful in changing their behavior, then you remove them from the project or your organization, as the case may be. But that's one of the big challenges that we have as an industry, in that we have promoted people that are very good at firefighting and solving problems in this type of environment, and they don't necessarily have the same the same skill set or a different skill set that we need to coach. And think about that: someone who's in command and control versus somebody that's enabling. Think about Pete Carroll with the Seattle Seahawks, and how much success that he's had out of that versus other coaches that may be less effective. So very very powerful concept there. And
yeah.
the kind of closing on that thought there, Todd. You were asking about things, but the other thing we hear is we're too busy to plan. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that on a job site, and wow. That's something that we need to get rid of, frankly. So,
yeah, that's too busy to plan. We're too sick to take the medicine. Yeah, can't you see how sick we are? We don't have time to take medicine. Yeah, I've been in situations like that, and you mentioned people, and it feels like this is another systemic problem in the construction industry, that it feels like it's a paradigm shift that's required to embrace lean, and I think it's long overdue. It's this mindset that the employees and the contractors on the job, if you view them as the problem that needs to be solved, that's very different than viewing them as a source of information and as a source of solutions. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the fundamental tenets of lean is that if something went wrong, it's not the person's fault. It's something set up with the process or the system failed. The person just happened to be there when the process or the system failed. So rather than fixing the blame, we should be fixing the problem. And lean is very much focused in that particular direction.
That's really powerful, because so many times the focus is on the who. It's whose fault was it? And I think a lot of that comes out of fear and insecurity, because there's something comforting to some people to know that, well, it was somebody else's fault. Well, this fell through, but it was because of that person, and it was their fault. And that doesn't solve anything. I mean, that lends itself to the old command and control basis, where it's about taking the biggest piece of the pie and keeping the least amount of responsibility and risk possible. But yeah, it would be so refreshing to be on a project where nobody's interested in pointing the finger at whose fault it was, but the focus is on the constraints and focusing on the process and the flow of information, and not worrying about whose fault was it. That would be very refreshing. Yeah, I definitely like the sound of that. So we're running up on close to an hour here, Dave. Is there anything else that you want to share about the last planner system, or about lean in general, before we talk about how people can connect with you and maybe what your company does?
Well, the question always comes up, where should we start on our lean journey? And
great question.
So typically what we tell people is just start. I mean, it doesn't necessarily matter what you do. It's just that get started. And the two areas where there's really good opportunity is use Last Planner on a project. Get a coach if you need one in order to help you walk through that. Make certain that you're doing things that you should be doing. Implement 5S on a project. And to your point, how do you end up leveraging the ideas of the folks that are on the job site? We've actually seen jobs where they actually have a polling meter at the point of entry and exit for a job site, where people get the mood of the day, if you will, on did you have the information you needed to do your job today, yes or no? and they can get a very good sense of, wow, okay, are we being productive? Do we have some other challenges tied to that? But coming back to, where do you start with lean? Just start doing it. And there's no shortage of information out there. The Lean Construction Institute is a great place to start. There are now, I think, on the order of 40 communities of practice throughout the footprint of the United States, as well as in Canada, Ireland, Israel, Australia, and the UK. So there are a lot of lean thinking organizations out there and communities that are trying to share lessons learned. How do we end up collectively as an industry getting better? How do we improve our supply chain? And those things, so that we're in a situation where, I recently read, ENR published that we were expecting 4% annual year-over-year growth through 2030. And if we look at the construction productivity in the United States, it's flat to declining. And it's going to get worse because we have a number of craft labor as well as others in the industry that are nearing retirement age. And so how do we end up being able to handle a 4% year-over-year growth when we are going to have fewer resources and our current practices are not improving to the extent to keep up with the growth? So I think there's a real opportunity for us with lean to leverage the assets, the human assets that we do have, to be more creative, more innovative, more productive with the way that we actually do our work. And I guess I'll close with the comment that I hear almost every day is that, well, how you doing? Well, I'm really busy. I hear that all the time. And the real question should be, or answer should be, I'm not busy. I'm highly productive, doing highly rewarding work. And that can be defined in a lot of different ways. But that would be the fundamental shift. If we could get people to responding in that manner rather than I'm busy, that would be fantastic for our industry.
Wow. So lots of paradigm shifts here, lots of mindset shifts that I'm hearing, changing the focus from activity and busyness to the flow on a project, from command and control to empowering the people closest to the front line, shifting from the scheduler on the hill, passing down the tablets of stone on with a CPM schedule, shifting that to a team approach, developing the plan. So, yeah, this has been extremely educational. I really appreciate all this information, Dave, and I'm going to make sure and have some links to resources on the show notes for this podcast. But if people want to find out more about what you're up to or connect with you, whether it be your website, email, social media, what are some of the best ways for people to get in touch with you, Dave?
Well, probably the best place to start is the website, which is umstotsolutions.com. So that's UMSTOT solutions.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, so David Umstot at LinkedIn. We do have a sister company as well, the Realignment Group of California, and our principals jointly own both firms. It's a seamless integration of services for our clients, and we offer lean coaching and other type of leadership and strategic training and consultation throughout the Western United States.
Fantastic. So umstotsolutions.com. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I'll also have a link to your LinkedIn profile as well, and I'll get a link to your sister company. Dave, this was great. Thanks so much. I may tap you for a few more resources if folks really want to find out how can they get started, because I know there's plenty of software out there. There's also a lot of people providing coaching, but I think that these are methods that people can just grab on and start using themselves. So I really appreciate all the resources. Appreciate you taking the time, and let me know if there's ever anything I can do for you.
Well, thank you, Todd.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dave Umstot. Great stuff. All the links that we've talked about in the show notes for this call are available at constructionleadingedge.com/040. This is episode 40. And remember, if you want to download that list of 41 mistakes when dealing with conflict at work, you can do that at constructionleadingedge.com/mistakes. If you want to check out the Arca Snapper app that I told you about for putting together slick reports for your clients to improve communication, you can do that at constructionleadingedge.com/reports, or you can just go to the home page, go to my resources tab, and you'll find all that stuff there. This is Todd DeWalt, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.